"The casket is empty!" shrieked the little girl during the millionaire's father's wake. They then pry open the casket in front of everyone and discover what's inside. Let me know what you think of my story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10. Your feedback is very important, and please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain lashed violently against the windows of Serenity Funeral Home when Juniper's cries shattered the solemn morning silence in Chicago. The 4-year-old, with her disheveled hair and soaked clothes, had sought refuge under the building's awning to escape the downpour battering the windy city. Her bare feet trembled against the cold pavement as she watched people dressed in black stream in and out of the building. Inside the funeral home, Harrison Sterling stood motionless before the closed casket where his father, Montgomery Sterling, was supposedly resting. At 45, Harrison bore the weight of a lifetime spent trying to earn the approval of a man who had always treated him with aloofness and disdain. His rigid posture and clenched jaw betrayed the emotional turmoil raging within. His father's death brought a guilty relief, mingled with the bitter certainty that he would never hear the words of validation he so craved. Meadow Hayes, a 38-year-old nurse who had cared for Montgomery in his final months, stood at the back of the room, discreetly observing Harrison. Her hazel eyes reflected the ache she felt watching him suffer, a silent love she had nurtured during her time at the Sterling mansion. Meadow had witnessed Montgomery's cruelty toward his son, always criticizing his decisions and belittling his achievements. Now, seeing Harrison so alone amidst the hypocritical condolences of acquaintances, her heart broke. The Reverend began his final remarks when a desperate scream echoed through the room. Juniper had slipped in through a side door someone had left ajar and was running toward the casket with outstretched arms. "The casket is empty!" "The man isn't in there," the little girl yelled, her words reverberating off the walls adorned with white lilies. A murmur of indignation swept through the attendees. Some of Chicago's socialites whispered among themselves, shocked by the interruption. Harrison turned slowly, his eyes meeting the small, wet figure of the child, who continued to scream and point at the casket. "Someone get that child out of here," muttered Dr. Alistair Finch, a family friend, but Harrison raised his hand, silencing him. Something in the urgency of Juniper's voice deeply disturbed him. The girl didn't seem to be playing or causing trouble out of malice. Her wide, frightened eyes conveyed a certainty that made Harrison's stomach churn. "He's not in there. I saw him leaving," Juniper insisted, tugging at the hem of Harrison's black suit. Meadow approached, recognizing the child's extreme state of distress. As a nurse, she had learned to identify when someone was genuinely disturbed versus just seeking attention. This girl was terrified by something she had witnessed. "Mr. Sterling," Meadow murmured, gently touching his arm. "Perhaps we should hear what she has to say." Harrison glanced at the nurse, who had always treated him with kindness, then at the girl trembling before him. A strange sensation washed over him, as if all the certainties he held about that day were about to crumble. "Open the casket," he said in a low but firm voice. "Harrison, for heaven's sake," protested his Aunt Beatrice, "you can't listen to the ravings of a street urchin." But Harrison had already made his decision. He approached the casket with determined steps, ignoring the scandalized murmurs of the guests. Orville Brewster, the 52-year-old undertaker who had worked at the funeral home for decades, paled when he realized Harrison's intentions. "Mr. Sterling, I don't think this is a good idea," Orville stammered, but his trembling voice only fueled Harrison's suspicion. With slightly shaking hands, Harrison opened the lid of the casket before all those present. The silence that followed was deafening. Inside the casket, instead of Montgomery Sterling's body, there was only an old porcelain doll and a carefully folded handwritten letter. Gasps of shock rippled through the room. Some people rose from their seats, others crowded closer for a better look. Harrison stood paralyzed, staring at the objects that replaced his father's body. The doll had blonde hair and wore a faded blue dress. Harrison recognized it immediately. It belonged to Celeste, his twin sister who had mysteriously disappeared when they were both just 6 years old. Celeste's disappearance had been the trauma that shattered his family, turning his mother into a melancholic woman who isolated herself from the world until her own premature death, and his father into an even more bitter and cruel man. Meadow covered her mouth with her hands, grasping the magnitude of the moment. She had heard Montgomery mention Celeste in his delirious moments during his final weeks, but she had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man at the end of his life. "Where is my father?" Harrison asked in a hoarse voice, turning to Orville with eyes that promised dire consequences. Orville recoiled, his hands shaking violently. He came to me yesterday morning, sir. He showed up here at the funeral home, alive, asking me to put these things in the casket." "Alive?" Harrison repeated, each word laced with growing fury. "He said it was a matter of life or death, that he needed to disappear for a while. He paid me a very large sum to arrange everything," Orville confessed, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. Juniper, who had been momentarily forgotten in the uproar, tugged at Harrison's pants again. "I saw him leaving through the back door last night. He was carrying a small suitcase and kept looking back like he was scared." Harrison knelt before the girl, holding her small shoulders. "Are you sure of what you saw?" Juniper nodded vigorously. "I remember everything. He wore a brown coat and a black beret. He got into a white car that was waiting on the corner." The girl's photographic memory impressed everyone present. Harrison realized that this child might hold the key to discovering his father's whereabouts, and more importantly, understanding why Montgomery had staged his own death. Meadow approached and placed her hand on Harrison's shoulder. "We need to talk about this calmly," she murmured, noticing that the guests were beginning to whisper amongst themselves, spreading the scandal. Harrison picked up the letter from the casket with trembling hands. The envelope had his name written in his father's familiar handwriting. Inside, a brief but devastating message. "Son, forgive me for what I did to our family. I need to right my wrongs before it's too late. The truth about Celeste is buried along with my sins. Find me when you are ready to forgive." The tears that Harrison had suppressed for years finally streamed down his face. His life had just been turned upside down, and all because of the cries of a street kid no one had taken seriously. 3 weeks had passed since the fake funeral, and the Sterling mansion had become a dark and silent place. Harrison wandered the halls like a ghost, his father's letter always in his coat pocket, obsessively rereading it for clues that might lead him to Montgomery. The scandal had spread throughout Chicago like wildfire, turning the family name into a source of endless gossip in the city's cafes and drawing rooms. Meadow had informally taken care of Juniper after discovering that the girl was sleeping in different awnings around the city, surviving on scraps of food and the sporadic kindness of some shopkeepers. The nurse had set up a mattress in the guest room of her small apartment and watched with growing concern as the child woke up screaming during the early hours, tormented by nightmares that mixed fragmented memories of abandonment with terrifying visions of an uncertain future. During the day, Juniper demonstrated an impressive intelligence for her age, remembering minute details about the people she saw on the streets. She had started drawing on scraps of paper that Meadow gave her, creating surprisingly accurate portraits of faces she had seen only once. This extraordinary ability made Meadow believe that the girl could be instrumental in finding Montgomery. On the morning of a particularly hot Monday, Harrison appeared at Meadow's apartment with dark circles under his eyes and rumpled clothes. He had spent the entire night investigating the family finances and discovered something that had made him nauseous. "Meadow, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "My father didn't fake his own death on a whim. I found documents hidden in his office. There are huge debts." Juniper was playing on the living room floor with colorful wooden blocks that Meadow had bought, but her sharp ears caught every word of the conversation. The girl had developed a habit of listening to everything around her, a survival skill acquired during her 2 years on the streets. "What kind of debts?" Meadow asked, pouring coffee for Harrison with slightly trembling hands. "Gambling, bets on cockfights, cards, even underground casinos in Las Vegas. He owed over $2 million to dangerous people," Harrison replied, running his hands over his face. "There are notes of threats, calls in the middle of the night. He was scared, Meadow, very scared." The revelation hit Meadow like a punch to the stomach. She had noticed that Montgomery was more nervous in his last weeks of life, but she had attributed it to the progression of his illness. Now she understood that the man was literally running from creditors who might kill him. "And now these people will come after you," she said, more as a statement than a question. Harrison nodded grimly. "I've already received 2 calls. They want the money in 30 days or they'll take everything we own. The company, this house, everything." Juniper approached silently, her large hazel eyes fixed on Harrison's anguished face. "The man in the beret was really scared," she said in her small but clear voice. "He was crying when he got into the white car." Harrison knelt before the girl, gently holding her small hands. "Juniper, could you recognize the car if you saw it again?" The girl closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were seeing everything again in her mind. It was a white Ford Focus. It had a scratch on the passenger door, and the license plate number ended in 7. The driver was wearing glasses and had a scar on his neck. The accuracy of the details provided by Juniper left Harrison and Meadow speechless. It was as if the girl possessed a photographic camera instead of a memory. "I'm going to look for that car," Harrison decided, rising with newfound determination. "Not alone," Meadow said firmly. "If these people are as dangerous as you say, you can't risk it. Then what do you suggest I do? Stay here waiting for them to come and get me?" The tension in the air was palpable when someone knocked on the apartment door. Everyone froze. Juniper ran behind the sofa, hiding as she had learned to do on the streets when she sensed danger. Meadow walked to the door and looked through the peephole. On the other side was a man she didn't recognize, well-dressed, holding a leather briefcase. "Who is it?" she asked through the door. "Dr. Jonathan Vance, attorney at law. I need to speak with Mr. Harrison Sterling about urgent matters relating to his father." Harrison approached the door, suspicious. "How did you know I was here?" "I've been looking for you for days. Your neighbors inform me that you frequent this residence." After exchanging glances with Meadow, Harrison decided to open the door. The man who entered was tall, thin, with carefully combed grey hair. His small, piercing eyes scanned the apartment before settling on Harrison. "Mr. Sterling, I represent some of your father's creditors. I've come to offer you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" Harrison asked, keeping his distance. "We know your father is alive and that you are looking for him. We can help in this search, but in return, we want guarantees that the debts will be paid." Juniper peeked from behind the sofa, studying every move of the stranger. Something about him deeply bothered her, a sense of danger that she had learned to recognize during her time on the streets. "And if we refuse to cooperate?" Harrison asked, crossing his arms. The lawyer smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "Then we will have to take more direct measures, starting with the confiscation of all family assets." "Are you threatening us?" "I'm being realistic, Mr. Sterling. Your father incurred these debts, and now they are your responsibility. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Meadow positioned herself next to Harrison, a silent demonstration of support that did not go unnoticed by the lawyer. "I see you have a new family to protect," Dr. Vance said, his eyes lingering on Juniper for a moment. "It would be a shame if something happened to innocent people." The veiled threat made Harrison's blood boil. "Get out of my sight now before I do something I might regret." The lawyer put some papers in the briefcase and headed to the door. "You have 1 week to think about my proposal, Mr. Sterling. After that, I can't guarantee that my clients will continue to be so diplomatic." After the man left, The apartment was immersed in tense silence. Juniper came out of her hiding place and ran to Meadow, hugging her legs tightly. "He's a bad person," the girl said, trembling. "His eyes are like the eyes of the bad men I saw on the street." Harrison sat heavily on the sofa, the reality of his situation finally crystallizing in his mind. He wasn't just looking for a fugitive father. He was racing against time to save everything that was left of his life. "Meadow," he said, looking directly into the eyes of the woman who had become his safe harbor, "I can't ask you and Juniper to get involved in this. It's too dangerous." "Too late for that," she replied, sitting next to him. "We're already involved, and we're not abandoning you now." Juniper approached and placed her little hand in Harrison's. "Let's find the beret man," she said with a determination impressive for a 4-year-old. "I remember everything I saw. I can help." Harrison looked at those two people who had become his makeshift family and felt for the first time in weeks that maybe he wasn't completely alone in this battle. But he also knew that time was running out, and the next decisions they made could determine whether they could find Montgomery before the creditors lost patience and resorted to more violent methods. 2 months had passed since Dr. Vance's threatening visit, and Harrison's situation had deteriorated drastically. The family coffee roasting business was being dismantled piece by piece by the creditors, who had obtained a court order to seize the assets. The mansion where he had grown up already had sold signs on the gate, forcing him to move to a small rented apartment downtown. Juniper had adapted surprisingly well to her new life with Meadow, but the nightmares continued to plague her nights. The girl had started attending a municipal daycare where she proved to be extremely intelligent, but also exhibited behaviors that worried the educators. She hoarded food hidden in her belongings and was in a constant state of alert whenever she heard louder male voices. During a particularly hot afternoon in August, Harrison arrived at Meadow's apartment with an expression that mixed hope and despair. He had spent weeks scouring auto repair shops and parking lots all over the city, showing the description of the white Ford Focus that Juniper had seen, until he finally found a concrete lead. "I found the car," he announced, collapsing into a kitchen chair. "It belongs to a man named Jonas Silver, who works as a gardener at a boarding house in Lincoln Park." Meadow stopped preparing dinner, a strange sensation running down her spine. Jonah Silver. "Isn't that a bit of a coincidence?" "That's exactly what I thought. Jonah Silver is such a common name that it could be easily made up," Harrison replied, pulling a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket. "But Juniper was right about all the details of the car. It's him." Juniper, who was playing with dolls on the living room floor, perked up her ears when she heard her name. She approached the adults with silent steps, a skill she had developed to listen to important conversations without being noticed. "Did you find the beret man?" she asked, her big eyes shining with curiosity. "Maybe," Harrison said, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "Would you like to come with us to see if it really is him?" Meadow looked at him worriedly. "Harrison, are you sure it's safe to take Juniper? If it really is your father, I need to be sure before I make any move, and Juniper is the only one who can confirm if it's him." The next day, the three headed to Lincoln Park in a cab. The boarding house where Jonah Silver supposedly worked was a 2-story building painted faded yellow, with a small garden in front where a middle-aged man was trimming bushes with careful and precise movements. When the man turned around, Harrison felt like he had been punched in the stomach. It was Montgomery, without a doubt, but completely transformed. He had lost at least 30 pounds, his beard was unshaven, and his clothes were simple and worn. The proud and authoritative man that Harrison had known had been replaced by someone who seemed burdened with sorrow and regret. Juniper squeezed Meadow's hand tightly. "It's him," she whispered. "But he's different. He looks sad." Montgomery hadn't noticed them yet, focused on his work. Harrison watched his father for several minutes, fighting against contradictory emotions that threatened to explode in his chest. Anger, relief, confusion, and a deep sadness mixed in an emotional storm that left him paralyzed. "What do you want to do?" Meadow asked softly. Before Harrison could answer, Montgomery looked up and saw them. The meeting of eyes between father and son was like an electric shock. Montgomery dropped the shears on the ground, his face paling instantly. For a moment that seemed like an eternity, no one moved. Then Montgomery walked slowly towards them, each step heavy with the weight of 2 months of guilt and regret. "Harrison," he said, his voice hoarse and trembling, "you found me." "It wasn't hard when you have professional creditors looking for you," Harrison replied, his voice laced with bitterness. "Do you have any idea what you left me to deal with?" Montgomery lowered his head, unable to maintain eye contact with his son. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness for what I did. $2 million, Dad, $2 million. I'm losing everything because of your insane bets." "It wasn't supposed to come to this," Montgomery murmured. "I thought I could fix it before." "Before what? Before they found out you were alive? Before they came after me?" Juniper hid behind Meadow, frightened by the raised voices. The girl had never seen Harrison so upset, and it made her remember terrifying moments she had experienced on the streets. Montgomery noticed the child's presence, and something in his expression changed. "Who's the girl?" he asked, his voice softening slightly. "Juniper was the one who discovered you were alive," Meadow explained, placing her hands protectively on the girl's shoulders. "She saw you leaving the funeral home." Montgomery knelt down slowly, getting down to Juniper's height. "Thank you for telling the truth, little one. You're very brave." To everyone's surprise, Juniper took a step forward. "Why were you crying when you got into the car?" she asked with the frankness typical of children. The question hit Montgomery like an arrow. Tears began to stream down his face as he struggled to find suitable words for a 4-year-old. "Because I did bad things that hurt people I love," he replied honestly, "and I was very afraid of the consequences. Consequences like having lost the family business, like having to sell our house, like having dangerous people threatening us." Harrison interrupted, his anger returning in full force. "There was a reason for all this," Montgomery said, standing up and finally looking directly at his son. "A reason that is linked to Celeste." The name of the missing twin sister made Harrison swallow hard. "What does Celeste have to do with your gambling debts?" "It wasn't just gambling debts, son. I was paying someone for years. Someone who knew the truth about what happened to your sister." The revelation fell like a bomb in the middle of the conversation. Meadow felt her legs go weak, while Harrison seemed to have been struck by lightning. "What truth?" Harrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Montgomery looked around, realizing that they were in a public area where anyone could hear. "I can't talk about it here. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous for whom? For you? Because it's been dangerous for me for months." "For all of us," Montgomery said gravely. "Especially for you and the people you love." His gaze went to Meadow and Juniper, and Harrison understood that his father was implying that they might also be in danger. "Then tell me everything, now," Harrison demanded. Montgomery took a deep breath, as if he were preparing to reveal the most painful secret of his life. "Celeste didn't disappear, Harrison. I gave her up for adoption when you were 6 years old." Harrison's world collapsed at that moment. All the nights he had spent crying for his lost sister, all the times he had questioned whether he could have done something to protect her, all the nightmares of kidnappings and tragedies, it had all been a lie. You did what?" He managed to articulate, his legs trembling. "I couldn't look at her after your mother died. Celeste was identical to her, even in her gestures. Every time I saw my daughter, it was like being stabbed in the heart. So I found a family in Phoenix who wanted to adopt a girl." Meadow covered her mouth with her hands, horrified by the confession. Juniper, even without fully understanding what was happening, perceived the extreme tension in the air and began to cry softly. "And the blackmail?" Harrison asked, his voice as cold as ice. "The adoptive family discovered who I was years later. They started demanding money in exchange for not revealing that I had lied about the disappearance." The amounts got bigger over time, until I couldn't pay just with the profits from the companies anymore. So you started betting to try to get the money, Harrison completed, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. Montgomery nodded, unable to look at his son. And I lost everything. When the gambling creditors started threatening me, I realized I had no way to escape the truth. Harrison took a few steps back, needing space to process everything he had heard. His sister was alive. She had grown up in another family, probably without knowing that she had a twin brother, and all because of his father's emotional cowardice. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice laden with deep pain. "I don't know," Montgomery admitted. "I lost contact with the blackmailing family when I fled. They stopped demanding money when they realized I had disappeared." The irony of the situation hit Harrison like a slap in the face. The moment he finally discovered that his sister was alive, he also lost any clue as to where to find her. A month after the confrontation at the boarding house, Harrison's life had taken a completely unexpected turn. Montgomery had moved into the small apartment that his son shared with Meadow and Juniper, creating a tense but necessary coexistence. The man who had once been proud and distant now spent his days helping with household chores and patiently playing with Juniper, as if he were trying to compensate for decades of emotional coldness. The financial situation remained desperate. The creditors had increased the pressure, and Dr. Vance appeared weekly with new veiled threats. Harrison had managed to get a temporary job at a small coffee roasting company, earning a fraction of what he used to receive, but at least maintaining some dignity while seeking solutions to the debt problem. Juniper had become the link that kept that makeshift family united. The girl, with her precocious wisdom born of suffering, watched the adults around her with an understanding that impressed everyone. She had started calling Montgomery Sad Grandpa, a nickname that moved him to tears every time he heard it. During a rainy morning in September, as Harrison arrived home after a particularly grueling shift at the roasting company, he found Meadow on the phone with an expression that mixed shock and hope. Yes, he's here," she was saying on the phone. "Can you repeat your name, please?" Harrison approached, intrigued, while Montgomery emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Juniper was playing on the living room floor, but she had raised her head, always attentive to the adults' conversations. "It's for you," Meadow said, extending the phone to Montgomery with trembling hands. It's a woman who says her name is Celeste Oliver." The phone almost slipped from Montgomery's hands. Harrison felt the air escape his lungs as he watched his father put the phone to his ear with violently shaking fingers. "Hello," Montgomery said, his voice barely above a whisper. On the other end of the line, a soft but determined female voice replied, "Dad? It's me, Celeste. I saw the fake obituary in the newspaper and then found out you were alive. I need to talk to you and my brother." Tears began to stream down Montgomery's face as he collapsed into a chair. "Celeste, my daughter, I'm coming to Chicago tomorrow," she interrupted. "I need to know the truth about what happened when I was a child, and I want to meet Harrison." The call lasted only a few minutes, but it completely changed the atmosphere of the apartment. When Montgomery hung up the phone, the silence that followed was charged with contradictory emotions. "She's coming," Montgomery murmured, looking at Harrison with tear-filled eyes. "Our Celeste is alive and wants to see us." Harrison couldn't respond immediately. Part of him was euphoric with the prospect of reuniting with the twin sister he had thought he had lost forever. Another part was terrified of what he would say to her, how he would explain the last 39 years of his life, how he would justify the lie that had separated them. Juniper approached and placed her little hand in Harrison's. "Are you happy or sad?" she asked with her childlike insight. "Both," Harrison replied honestly, gently squeezing the girl's hand. "Sometimes we can feel different things at the same time." The next day, when Celeste arrived at the apartment, the moment was more intense than anyone had imagined. She was a 45-year-old woman, tall and elegant, with brown hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that were strikingly identical to Harrison's. Her physical resemblance to the twins' deceased mother was impressive, immediately explaining why Montgomery couldn't look at her as a child. "Harrison," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I've dreamed of this moment for years." The embrace between the siblings was long and silent, filled with decades of longing and unanswered questions. Juniper watched everything from afar, fascinated by the resemblance between the two adults. "Do you remember me?" Harrison asked when they finally separated. "I remember fragments. I remember we played together, that you always protected me when I had nightmares. I remember our mother singing before we went to sleep," Celeste replied, tears streaming down her face. "But for years I thought they were just dreams." Montgomery remained in the corner of the room, watching his children's reunion with a mixture of joy and guilt that gnawed at him. When Celeste finally turned to him, her expression hardened visibly. "Dad," she said, the word laden with decades of hurt, "I need you to tell me everything. The whole truth." In the hours that followed, Montgomery told the whole story, from the premature death of his wife to the decision to give Celeste up for adoption, through the blackmail and up to the present moment. Celeste listened to everything in silence, her face shifting through a range of emotions that went from sadness to anger and finally to a painful understanding. "The family who adopted me were good people," she said when Montgomery finished. "The Olivers loved me as if I were their biological daughter. But I always felt like something was missing, a connection I couldn't explain. They were the ones who started blackmailing us?" Harrison asked, still trying to process all the information. Celeste shook her head. "No. My adoptive parents died in an accident when I was 16. After that, I went to live with my aunt, who discovered my true identity by rummaging through the adoption papers. She was the one who started blackmailing our father." The revelation brought partial relief to Montgomery, who had carried additional guilt, thinking that good people were taking advantage of the situation. "Where is your aunt now?" asked Meadow, who had remained silent, observing the family meeting. "She died last year. That's when the blackmail stopped," Celeste explained. "But I've known the truth for years. I was gathering the courage to look for you when I saw the fake obituary in the newspaper." Juniper, who had been quiet throughout the whole conversation, suddenly approached Celeste and extended a drawing she had made while the adults were talking. It was a surprisingly accurate portrait of the three adults together, with herself small in the middle. "This is our family," the girl said simply. Celeste looked at the drawing and then at Juniper, touched by the child's innocence and wisdom. "You're very special," she said, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "Who are you in their lives?" "I'm the girl who found out that sad Grandpa was alive," Juniper replied. "And now we're a family." It was at that moment that the biggest twist in the story occurred. Celeste turned to Meadow with a strange expression on her face. "Excuse me, but I need to ask, what is this child's full name?" "Juniper Santana," Meadow replied, intrigued by the question. Celeste's face paled instantly. "Santana? Her mother's name was Delilah Santana?" Meadow nodded, confused. "Yes, but how do you—" "Delilah worked for our family when I was a child," Celeste said, looking directly at Montgomery. "She was unfairly fired by you, Dad. Accused of a theft that never happened." Montgomery closed his eyes, another layer of guilt adding to the weight he already carried. "I remember her. She was a good employee, but I was so bitter back then. Delilah lost all subsequent jobs because of the rumors you spread about her," Celeste continued, her voice growing harder. "That's why she ended up on drugs. That's why she lost her daughter." The final connection was made in the minds of everyone present. Juniper's suffering was directly linked to Montgomery's past actions. The girl who had saved the family by discovering he was alive was also a victim of the consequences of his cruel decisions. "Where is Delilah now?" Celeste asked. In a rehab clinic in Phoenix, Meadow replied. She managed to check herself in 6 months ago and is clean. She called me last week asking about Juniper. Then let's bring her home, Celeste said with determination. And let's give her the job and the dignity that our father took from her years ago. Harrison looked at his sister with growing admiration. What about the debts, the creditors? Celeste smiled for the first time since she arrived. I'm a teacher, but I also inherited some properties from my adoptive parents. I have enough resources to pay off the debts and still have enough left to start over. Why would you do this for us? Montgomery asked, his voice broken by emotion. Because we're family, Celeste replied simply, and because it's time to break the cycle of pain that has haunted us for decades. 2 months later, on a sunny morning in November, Juniper was running through the backyard of the new house that the family had bought on the outskirts of Chicago. Delilah, completely recovered and working as a cook at the school that Celeste had opened for underprivileged children, watched her daughter play with the smile she had lost during her years of addiction. Harrison and Meadow had gotten married in a simple ceremony, with Juniper as the flower girl and Montgomery walking alongside his son to the altar. A symbolic gesture of reconciliation that moved everyone present. Celeste had moved permanently to Chicago, bringing with her her 2 teenage children, who quickly fell in love with their new little cousin. Montgomery spent his days helping at Celeste's school and at night read stories to Juniper, making up for all the moments of affection he had denied his own children. The girl had stopped having nightmares, and her photographic memory was now used for positive activities, such as helping other children with learning difficulties. On a special afternoon, when the whole family was gathered in the backyard for Juniper's 5th birthday, the girl made a drawing that perfectly summarized everything they had achieved. It was a large red heart with all their important figures inside. Harrison and Meadow holding hands, Montgomery smiling, Celeste hugging her children, Delilah cooking, and herself in the center of everything, surrounded by love. This is our real family, Juniper said, showing the drawing to everyone. A family that found itself. Montgomery looked at the drawing, and then at all the faces around him, faces that expressed forgiveness, love, and hope. For the first time in decades, he understood that some wounds, no matter how deep, can truly heal when there is enough courage to face the truth and enough love to forgive. The little Juniper, who had started the story screaming in a funeral home about an empty casket, had become the catalyst that brought life back to a family that thought it was lost forever. And in the end, they discovered that the real treasures were not in the money or the properties they had lost, but in the bonds that should never have been broken, and that, finally, had been restored. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.